Hey guys, welcome to Who Wants to Be a Missionary? Missionary Myths, Part 3. When you arrive, everything falls into place. After a lot of praying, after a lot of planning, a lot of fundraising, and some waiting, I was finally here. I was in Colombia. That first morning when I woke up, it felt so surreal. I couldn't believe that just a few months ago, I was going on short-term missions, and now God had called me. I had answered the call. I had obeyed the call. I gave my 2-week notice or my notice at work, and I packed my bags up, and I was here. I was a missionary. I had made it, and I thought the hardest part was getting here, and man, was I wrong. That was actually the easiest part. Before I came to Colombia, I was staying with some friends in South Florida, and they were going to take me to Miami to catch my flight to Colombia. The flight kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. I don't even remember. It's been so long ago now. I don't remember how many times the flight got delayed, but it was several times. I already had things planned here in Colombia. The city that you arrive to in Colombia is called Bogota, and it is about, at that time, the way the roads were, it was about 4.5 hours from Bogota to Ibagué, which is the city that I was going to be arriving in, which is the city that I live in now. I had lined things up for someone to pick me up in Colombia, in Bogota. And all the plans were in motion. You know, I thought that I had everything figured out and I had everything ready to go, and the flight kept getting delayed. Plans kept getting messed up. Things kept getting pushed back. But finally I got on that plane, and I remember getting on that plane in Miami on my way to Colombia, and I was excited. I was overwhelmed. There was just a mix of emotions, and I remember that there was one word that kept echoing in my spirit. I heard that word over and over and over again in my heart, and it was destiny, destiny, destiny. And I knew that I was walking in to what God had called me to. I knew that it was the next step in my life. Eventually, I landed in Bogota, and then came the bus ride from Bogota to Ibagué, which is about 4 hours, I think, at that time. Everything was new. Everything was exciting. Everything was different. And I'll never forget that bus ride coming in to Ibagué. I still remember waking up that first morning in Ibagué, and it was so surreal. It was almost like I was in a dream. I felt like I was living inside of a dream, and I couldn't believe that I was actually here. And then slowly but surely, reality started setting in. I didn't speak Spanish. I'd only been here a couple weeks, a few months back, not even a year ago, and I didn't know the culture. I didn't understand how things worked here, how people thought here. And, you know, they have these little places in each neighborhood, actually several in each neighborhood. They're called tiendas, which are little markets. If you've ever been to Latin America, you know what I'm talking about. And I couldn't even go into the little tienda and buy a bottle of water. I didn't know how to count Colombian pesos. I didn't know how to ask for anything. And some days were extremely overwhelming. I would go to bed at night and my brain just could not handle anymore, because there was so much going on, and there was so much that I was trying to learn and I didn't understand. And I remember that I brought with me a little pocket translator. It's a Seiko Berlitz pocket translator, and that works great for words, not for pronunciation. Those of you who are under 40 have no idea that the Berlitz translator, the Seiko Berlitz translator, that was high tech. Then what had been so exciting suddenly became very, very complicated. I hadn't been here very long, and I was staying in a home that was a few blocks away from the church, and I would walk back and forth every day to the church and back home by myself. And as most Americans, I didn't really think about keeping my valuables out of sight. At that time, we didn't have cell phones, but I had a digital camera, and I was carrying that digital camera in my hand as I was walking back home one afternoon from the church back to the house where I was staying at, and I noticed that there was a motorcycle with two guys that kept driving past me. They would go and come back, go and come back. And I didn't pay a lot of attention to it because I was used to people noticing that I wasn't from here. I mean, obviously, I'm not Colombian and I was a foreigner. And so you just kind of get used to people looking at you, or, it's just something you get used to. And I wasn't paying a lot of attention. And so I just kept walking back home. When I got back, got back to the house, there was nobody at home. So I walked up, and the house was on an incline. So the driveway sloped back down toward the street, and it sloped up to the house. And I was opening up the door, and all of a sudden, I didn't realize it when it happened, but the motorcycle arrived at the end of the driveway, which wasn't a long distance away from where the door was. And there suddenly was a man that was standing behind me. And I didn't even know when when he ran up behind me. I had no idea. And he grabbed my arm and he started pulling me back down toward the motorcycle. And I started screaming in English, "Help, help, help, help." Obviously, that didn't do a lot of good. There was nobody there, first of all. There was nobody around. And this guy was pulling me back down toward the motorcycle. I was on the upper part of the slope, and he was on the bottom part of the slope. And I don't know where the courage came from, but I doubled up my fists and I started punching him in the face as hard and as fast as I could. And since he was on the lower end, I had the upper hand, literally had the upper hand. And I just kept hitting him and hitting him and hitting him until he let me go, and they got on the motorcycle and they took off. I was shaken, obviously, and I think that's when I actually realized this is real life. This is real life here, and there's a lot of things that I need to learn and a lot of things that I need to start paying attention to. Then there's something that happens that a lot of people don't talk about. The excitement wears off, the emotional high wears off, and I wasn't the new missionary anymore. I wasn't the new gringa everybody wanted to meet, everybody wanted to practice their English on. This was my life now. This is what I'm living. And I think one of the greatest lessons that I've learned in my life being a missionary is that destiny isn't this huge dramatic moment. Sometimes it looks like showing up. Sometimes it looks like giving that word of encouragement to that person that needs to hear it, or pray for that person that needs prayer. Just on Sunday, my daughter and I, after church, we went to get some lunch. And there's a bookstore that's right beside the mall where we usually go to get lunch. And both of us said, "Hey, let's just walk over to the bookstore." We hadn't been there for a long time. And we walked over to the bookstore on Sunday. And there was a lady that was sitting on a sidewalk. And it's not uncommon to see people sitting on a sidewalk or asking for money. That's not an uncommon thing that we see here. And I remember I walked past her, and she looked like she had some kind of physical problem going on. She was sitting there. She had her eyes closed. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't asking for anything. And I had a little bit of money, and I saw that there were some coins on the floor around her. And I put it there on the sidewalk beside her. And we went into the bookstore. And about 45 minutes later, we walked out, and she was still sitting there. But this time when she came out, she was crying. And I could tell she was in some kind of pain. I assumed that it was physical pain. And we almost kept walking, because a lot of times we think, well, I already gave this person this or that. And we think that we've done our duty, and we keep walking. But that morning, that afternoon, something pulled me back over to her, which was God that pulled me back over to her. I asked her if she was in pain, and she said she was. And I asked her if I could pray for her, which we did. And as she talked, she began to tell me about how she had just had this surgery. Her husband had died, and she was by herself raising 2 children, and she didn't have anybody, really didn't have anybody. It was about 2 p.m, and I felt like asking her if she had eaten anything. And I asked her, and she said she hadn't. Since she had had surgery, I didn't ask her how long ago she had surgery, but it didn't look like it had been. She had some kind of incision on her stomach, and it didn't look like it had been a long time. And I said, well, what can you eat? And there was a fruit stand. You see a lot of like different stands around us, and there was a fruit stand, and she said, well, I said, can you eat fruit? And she said, no, because of the surgery, I really can't. I think it was pineapple, something that was kind of acidic. And I said, well, what can you eat? And she said, well, I can eat soup. And I looked at my daughter, and sometimes the little things are are destiny moments. Because at lunch, we had gotten soup with our meal, and something that we very rarely do, we had asked for a to-go box, and we had packed that soup up in that to-go box and brought it with us. We usually don't do that because it's soup and because it's hard to bring back, but we did that day. And I looked at her, and we immediately knew that we needed to give the soup to her. So we gave the soup to her, and we gave her some money, and we continued on to what we were doing. Now, I don't know if something changed in her life. I believe that it did. I know that it was a God moment. She was just sitting on a sidewalk carrying pain that most people around her will never realize and will never experience. God saw her. God saw her, and he cared enough to stop two people on a sidewalk that afternoon and pray for her and encourage her and give her, a bowl of soup. And sometimes destiny looks like a bowl of soup. Sometimes destiny looks like that $20 that you give that person that really needs it at the time. And you could probably use it, but they need it more. That's what destiny looks like. It's not always super exciting or super dramatic, and it doesn't always make it into the monthly newsletter or the monthly fundraising. That's missionary life. That's ministry. That's calling. 30 years ago, I thought destiny was getting on an airplane. Today, I think destiny looks like paying attention to those people that God have placed around you. Everything isn't always exciting. There are exciting times. There are miraculous times. There are things that blow my mind still when I think about the things that God has done. But I think that the ordinary times are just as mind-blowing as the times that are super exciting and that gets everybody wanting to give and wanting to help and wanting to pray. Those short-term mission trips, they were exciting. They were exciting. But this is too. This is too, because we're still obeying God every single day in our life. We're still obeying God. And the real journey hasn't been about learning Spanish. The real journey hasn't been about learning the culture or surviving a kidnapping attempt. It's not about that. It's about every day. It's about walking in that every day. And I thought that Colombia was the finish line, but I very soon realized that Colombia was actually the starting line. That calling got me here. God calling to me got me here. But learning to live here became a lifelong lesson to what destiny really looks like. There are good days and there are hard days. But if you're willing to show up, if you're willing to keep paying attention and keep following where God leads you, wherever you are right now, because I want this podcast to be about not just what God's doing with me, but I want it to be about what God can do with you. Because if you're being faithful to where God leads you, you will discover something very amazing. And I thought destiny was a place that God was taking me, but I learned that destiny is found walking with Him one day at a time. So if you've ever wondered, when you finally arrive to that calling, when you finally obey and you're finally there, if everything falls into place, the answer is no. Life happens, and life still happens. Challenges still come. But if you're willing to say yes to God, I said yes to God that day. And if you're willing to discover that some of the most meaningful moments aren't the ones you planned, they're the ones that He's planned. You can walk in destiny every single day of your life. You can walk in destiny when you go to work. You can walk in destiny when you go to school. You can walk in destiny when you're at the supermarket. You can walk in destiny wherever you are and wherever you're doing all the time if you choose to say yes. What if destiny isn't what you're waiting for? What if destiny is what's right in front of you right now, today? Thank you for watching. I really appreciate all the people that have encouraged me and that are watching, that pray for us. So I just want to encourage you to keep seeking, be ready at all time, because we're living in great times on the earth. God bless you, and thank you again.